It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in the small town park, the kind of day where families gathered on benches, children played on the swings, and the smell of fresh flowers carried in the breeze. Among the laughter and chatter, a little girl named Lily stood with her mother by a picnic table. Lily was no more than 7 years old, with bright, curious eyes and a smile that could soften even the hardest heart. Her mother had bought her a small box of cupcakes from a nearby bakery, a treat Lily had been looking forward to all week. She held the box carefully, deciding which cupcake she would eat first, when her eyes wandered to the edge of the park. Sitting under a large oak tree was a man whose clothes were torn and worn, his face tired, and his eyes distant. He had been in the town for weeks now, quietly keeping to himself, never causing trouble, just existing on the fringes of everyone's awareness. Some people whispered about him being homeless, others ignored him altogether, but no one really knew his story. His name was Thomas. Once he had a home, a family, and a steady job, but after a series of losses, his wife's passing, the loss of his job, and the weight of depression, life had pushed him into the shadows. Lily tugged on her mother's sleeve and asked in her soft voice, "Mom, why does that man look so sad?" Her mother hesitated, unsure how to explain the complexities of homelessness to a child so young. She simply said, "He's having a hard time, sweetheart." Lily stood in silence for a moment, then looked down at the box of cupcakes in her hands. Without another thought, she picked the biggest cupcake, decorated with bright pink frosting and rainbow sprinkles, and walked over to the man. Thomas noticed the small figure approaching. He looked up, startled, as Lily stopped in front of him and held out the cupcake with both hands. "This is for you," she said with a shy but determined smile. Thomas blinked, unable to speak at first. His throat tightened as he took the cupcake from her tiny hands. "For me?" he whispered. Lily nodded. "Yes, everyone deserves something sweet." In that moment, something inside Thomas shifted. For weeks, he had felt invisible, like the world had forgotten him. Yet here was a child, offering not just food, but kindness, without judgment, without hesitation. His eyes welled with tears as he thanked her. Lily skipped back to her mother, unaware that her small act had planted the first seed of hope in a man who had nearly lost all faith in people. The next day, Thomas returned to the same park, this time with the cupcake wrapper carefully folded in his pocket, a reminder that someone had seen him. A passerby noticed him smiling faintly for the first time in weeks. Later, a local shop owner who had heard about the little girl's gesture approached Thomas and offered him a warm meal. It wasn't much, but it was given with respect, and that respect began to restore Thomas's sense of dignity. Word spread quickly in the town about the little girl and her cupcake. People began to reflect on how they treated those who were struggling. A woman who usually hurried past Thomas without a glance decided to stop and ask his name. A man who ran a diner offered him part-time work washing dishes. Slowly, the community that had once ignored him began to rally around him. Thomas, in turn, began to change. With each act of kindness shown to him, his strength returned. He accepted the job at the diner and started saving what little money he could. The people who once looked past him now greeted him with warm hellos. Children who had once been told to avoid him now waved when they saw him at the park. All of this, he knew deep in his heart, had started because of a little girl who offered him a cupcake. But the ripple didn't stop there. Inspired by Lily's innocence and generosity, the town began organizing community meals for anyone in need. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other before now came together to cook, share, and care for those less fortunate. Local businesses pitched in with donations, and schools began teaching children about the importance of kindness. The entire atmosphere of the town began to shift, becoming warmer, more compassionate, and more united. One evening months later, Thomas stood in front of the community during a gathering at the park. Clean-shaven, wearing clothes given to him by neighbors, and with a newfound light in his eyes, he shared his story. He spoke of the loneliness he had endured, the pain of losing everything, and the despair of feeling invisible. Then he spoke of the cupcake, the tiny act of kindness from a little girl who reminded him that he still mattered. His voice broke as he said that cupcake wasn't just food, it was hope. It was a reminder that I was still human, still worthy of kindness. The crowd listened in silence, many with tears in their eyes. Lily, sitting on her mother's lap, beamed with pride, not fully understanding the depth of what she had done, but feeling the love and gratitude radiating from Thomas and everyone else. From that day forward, the story of the little girl and the cupcake became a symbol in the town. People began calling it the cupcake effect, the idea that even the smallest act of kindness can create ripples far beyond what we can imagine. And indeed, the ripple continued to spread. Other towns heard the story and began their own initiatives of kindness. Schools used it as a lesson for children, encouraging them to perform small acts of compassion each day. Families began talking more openly about empathy, reminding each other that every gesture matters. As for Thomas, his life was transformed. With steady work, he managed to rent a small apartment. He became a volunteer at the same community center that organized meals, offering guidance and support to others going through hard times. He made it his mission to remind people that no matter how small an act may seem, it has the power to change everything. Years later, Lily, now older, walked through that same park where it all began. She saw Thomas, healthier and smiling, surrounded by children who listened to his stories. She realized that her simple gift had blossomed into something far greater than she could have imagined. Her act of kindness had not only saved a man's spirit, but it had brought a community together and ignited a chain of compassion that continued to grow. And so the truth became clear. Small acts of kindness are never small at all. A cupcake, a smile, a kind word, each one can ripple outward, touching hearts, changing lives, and even transforming entire communities. What Lily showed the world that day is something we all must remember, that kindness, no matter how simple, has the power to heal, to restore, and to unite. There are moments in life when people feel invisible, when the weight of their struggles makes them believe they are forgotten. Yet it is in those very moments that a simple act of kindness, a word of compassion, or a hand extended in support can restore what feels broken beyond repair. This story is about how human worth is restored through kindness and connection, and how lives can change forever when someone dares to see the humanity in another. It begins with an old man named Samuel. He had once been a teacher, loved by his students and respected in his community, but life had taken a cruel turn. After the sudden passing of his wife, his loneliness grew unbearable, and his health began to decline. The small savings he had were drained by medical bills, and before long, Samuel found himself standing at the edge of despair. His home was taken away, and the streets became his shelter. People passed him every day, their eyes fixed straight ahead, pretending he wasn't there. It was as if he had become invisible. The once confident teacher, who used to inspire children with lessons of hope and courage, was now just another forgotten man huddled on a sidewalk, clutching a thin blanket against the cold. On one particularly harsh winter morning, a young woman named Clara noticed him. She was running late for work, clutching her coffee as she hurried down the crowded street, but something about Samuel made her stop. He wasn't holding a sign, he wasn't begging. He was just sitting there quietly, his tired eyes staring at nothing. Clara felt a tug at her heart. She walked over and asked softly, "Sir, have you eaten today?" Samuel looked up in surprise, as if he hadn't heard kindness directed at him in a very long time. Slowly, he shook his head. Clara smiled gently and said, "Then let me get you something warm." She went into a nearby cafe, bought a sandwich and soup, and handed them to him. Samuel's hands trembled as he took the food. Tears welled up in his eyes, not because of the meal itself, but because someone had actually seen him. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Clara knelt down and introduced herself. That was the beginning of a connection that would change both of their lives. Clara didn't stop with just one meal. Every day, she made time to speak with Samuel. Sometimes she brought food, other times a blanket, and sometimes just conversation. She listened to his stories about teaching, about his late wife, about the dreams he once had. With every word, Samuel began to feel pieces of himself returning. He was no longer just a homeless man on the street. He was Samuel again, a human being with a history, with value, with a voice that mattered. One afternoon, Clara sat with him longer than usual, and she asked, "If you could do anything again, what would it be?" Samuel thought for a moment and said, "I'd love to teach again. Teaching was my life, but who would want to listen to me now?" Clara smiled and replied, "I would, and I think many others would too." Clara worked at a community center, and she decided to invite Samuel to share his knowledge there. At first, Samuel resisted. Shame and doubt had convinced him that he no longer had anything to offer. But Clara persisted, reminding him that his experience and wisdom were priceless. Finally, one evening, Samuel agreed to visit. When he walked into the center, he felt nervous and small. But the moment he began to speak to a group of teenagers gathered there, something inside him came alive. He shared lessons not just from books, but from life, lessons about resilience, about love, about never giving up on yourself even when the world seems to give up on you. The teenagers listened with wide eyes, captivated. And for the first time in years, Samuel's heart felt full. From then on, Samuel became a regular mentor at the center. The community started to recognize his value again. He wasn't invisible anymore. People greeted him with smiles and gratitude. The very man who had once been lost in silence and isolation was now restoring hope in others. But the truth is, Samuel wasn't the only one changed. Clara, too, discovered something profound. She realized that kindness is not just about helping someone in need. It's about connection, about seeing the humanity in each other. She learned that when we take the time to acknowledge someone's worth, we also restore a part of our own. Her relationship with Samuel gave her a deeper sense of purpose, reminding her that life isn't about rushing past one another, but about walking together, even if only for a short distance. Over time, Samuel's health improved, and through the help of the community center, he found a modest apartment. It wasn't much, but it was his home. Every morning, he stood at the window, watching the sunrise, grateful that life had given him another chance. And every week, he continued to teach and mentor, passing along not just knowledge, but the truth he had come to understand, that no one is ever beyond hope, no one is ever truly lost, and sometimes all it takes is one person who chooses to see you. His story spread through the community, inspiring others to look differently at the people around them. Where once there was indifference, now there was compassion. People began to stop and speak to those they would normally ignore. They began to give, not just food or money, but dignity and respect. Samuel's journey reminds us of something vital, that human worth is not measured by wealth, status, or appearances. It is measured by the love we give, the connections we form, and the kindness we extend to one another. Even in the darkest times, a single act of compassion can light a fire that restores hope and dignity. And so, the man who once sat invisible on a cold street became a beacon of light. His life proved that when we feel seen, valued, and supported, we rediscover our dignity, our purpose, and our hope. Humanity is never truly lost. It only waits to be awakened by kindness.